Welcome back, guys. As you can see again, I'm in my apartment today. It's very rainy outside, hence my lack of being in nature. But today, I've got a more political video than usual for you, but that isn't to say that it's not grounded in philosophy. So, the title here is Why America is Collapsing. And I'm bringing you some words of wisdom from Jean-Jacques Rousseau from his Emile or On Education. And this is, I've read a number of Rousseau's uh, writings, but this is probably my favorite by far. It's worth a read, absolutely. So he says, let us suppose the state be composed of 10,000 citizens. The sovereign can be considered only collectively as a body, but each individual as a subject has a personal and independent existence. Thus, the sovereign is to the subject as 10,000 is to 1. That is, each member of the state has only a 10,000th part of the sovereign authority as his share, although he is totally subject to that authority. If he continues to make the same analogy where the people or the body of the people is made up of 100,000 people, and he says that the people or the subject is then only 100,000th of a share of the authority in making laws, and yet he is still fully subjected to them. And he uses this point to say that, let's see, where is it? Thus, while the subject always remains one, that is, the law-making capability, the ratio of the sovereign to the subject increases in proportion to the number of citizens. From this, it follows that the more the state expands, the more liberty diminishes. And that would be because in the government, you have the social compact, which is the will of everyone, all together making laws. And so, to Rousseau's mind, in that way, you're only obeying yourself, because you are a part of that general will. But as people become more and more in this social compact, your contribution to the social or to the general will becomes less and less, making your personal will, your desires for what the law should be, less and less, thereby decreasing the amount of yourself that you're obeying, if that makes sense. So he says directly after that quote, now the less the particular wills correspond to the general will, that is, the less morals correspond to laws, the more the repressing force ought to increase. I.e., the more force the government needs in making laws and executing them. Well, where America's gone wrong so far is that while our population has increased, in general, the extent to which the laws are being enforced in America has decreased, as we all know. In large cities, particularly Chicago comes to mind, they no longer enforce shoplifting laws, at least on small objects, because, it might have something to do with the fact that petty theft is a crime committed more by one race than another, and I'll leave you to decide which race you think that is. And that's just statistics, basic facts. You can't really argue against that. But yeah, as is evident by that, along with the border crisis, which was created by people not enforcing laws, and all sorts of other things, you can see that the power of the government hasn't increased with the with the increase in population. That's mistake number one. He also says, In general, there are two easy and simple rules for judging the relative goodness of governments. And here I'm making an argument that it's the government itself which has started to collapse, not just society, culture, and the American people in general. He continues, one is population. In every country which is becoming depopulated, the state is tending towards its ruin, and the country which has the highest rate of population growth, even if it is the poorest, is infallibly the best governed. At this point in time, it's incontestable that the birth rate of American citizens is not at a level which is capable of sustaining the country's population. Ergo, our population is declining. And he has counter arguments ready for those of you who say, oh, but our population isn't declining. Yes, it is, because the only reason our population hasn't declined yet is because we artificially inflate our population growth by importing immigrants and and people from outside nations. But he says, for this to be the case, it is necessary that the size of a country's population be a natural effect of its government and morals. For if population growth is accomplished by bringing in colonists or by other accidental and temporary means, they would prove the disease by the need for the remedy. He continues to elaborate this problem by saying it is necessary that the goodness of the governments incline citizens to marry, as an example, rather than that the law constrain them to do so. One should not examine what is done by force, for the law which combats the Constitution is evaded and becomes vain. Instead, one should examine what is accomplished by the influence of morals and by the natural bent of the government, for these means alone have a constant effect. Meaning, it's not, the law doesn't require people to get abortions, and yet some of them, their morality tells them that it's okay. This would be the kind of consequence from morals rather than laws that he's talking about. And it is by that very rule that we can say, at least in one manner, that America is declining. And he gives the second sign of relative goodness of government, and he says that it's namely, it's from distribution, not from its quantity, meaning population. He says two states equal in size and in the number of men can be very unequal in strength, and the most powerful of the two is always the one whose inhabitants are most evenly distributed over its territory. The one which does not have big cities, and which is consequently less brilliant, will always defeat the other. It is big cities which exhaust a state and cause its weakness. The wealth they produce is only apparent and illusory, a lot of money that has little effect. It is said that he brings up an example. It is said that the city of Paris is worth a province to the King of France. I believe that it costs him several more than what he says it's worth. That is, that Paris is fed by the provinces in more than one respect, and that most of their revenues are paid out in this city and stay there without ever returning to the people or to the king. It is conceivable that in this age of calculators, there is none who can perceive that France would be much more powerful if Paris were annihilated. I kind of like that phrase. It's a little, it's harsh, but truth doesn't know niceties. So he continues after that, the uneven distribution of the people is not only disadvantageous to the state, it is even more ruinous than depopulation itself, for depopulation results only in a product which is non-existent, whereas badly arranged consumption results in a negative product. A paragraph later, he says, the study of diverse peoples in their remote provinces and in the simplicity of their original genius results in a general observation quite favorable to my epigraph and quite consoling to the human heart. It is that all nations appear much better when they are observed in this way, meaning by looking not at their cities, but by looking at their rural areas. Uh, and this is because, quote, the closer they are to nature, the more their character is dominated by goodness. It is only by closing themselves up in cities and corrupting themselves by means of culture that they become depraved and exchange a few defects that are more coarse than harmful for appealing and pernicious vices. I don't think I certainly couldn't have said it better myself. And it is for this reason, also in part, that America is collapsing. At this point, the population of America could be displayed in its majority by taking the population of or by adding the population of the 5 largest cities, or somewhere around that number. It may be more or less. I don't know exactly. But at this point, those populations in the cities are greater than the rural populations of the rest of the country. And if we follow Rousseauian logic, that is a massive problem, because they now have the democratic majority to make the immoral laws that would spawn from their immoral culture, and thus when they actually show up to vote, because we all know that Democrats have a problem showing up to vote in America, they can actually cause some significant problems by electing people who have these bad morals from their upraising in cities, and more or less the balance which should have been struck, and the overwhelming balance, or perhaps the overwhelming overbalance of these bad morals by the people in rural areas, is no longer sufficient to mitigate the destructive tendencies of people who live in cities. So this video was a little bit longer than usual. I tried to make it as short as I could, but I like to take my time with Rousseau because he's a good guy. So thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below if you have thoughts. Colonel's in. Colonel's out.